March Comes In Like a Lion is a comic by Japanese author Chika Umino and originally began serialization in 2007. It received a phenomenal two-season TV adaptation by Studio Shaft in 2016. The adaptation will serve as the basis for my commentary, since it's my sole exposure to the series. The show explores the themes of the duality of happiness and sadness, as well as the value of connections. The story follows Rei Kiriyama as he goes about his life as a pro shogi player in Japan. For those unaware, shogi is essentially the Japanese version of chess. Through Rei's thoughts and actions, we can safely assume that he suffers from depression and anxiety as a result of his upbringing. There's even a fan theory that Rei has Asperger's syndrome, which is easy to buy into given his behavior. But before I get too ahead of myself, let's look at Rei's circumstances. He grew up in a relatively normal household with his parents and a younger sister. Throughout his early childhood, Rei was mocked by his peers for being introverted and keeping to himself constantly. This naturally leads Rei to further isolate himself from others. However, Rei took solace in playing shogi with his father, who aimed to become a professional. Rei eventually becomes a shogi prodigy himself, but seems to have no intention of following the same route as his father. He simply played the game to have a sense of belonging.
One day, my average life as I knew it ended, as if it had been torn away from me. When I returned from a school trip, my whole family was suddenly taken from me. My mom, dad, and little sister.
However, everything changes when, upon returning from a school field trip, Rei is informed his entire family was killed in a crash involving a drunk truck driver. At the funeral, Rei overhears his relatives talking about putting him up for adoption, and his immediate concern about that idea was being around other children in an orphanage 24/7. This would mean Rei would never have time alone to himself again, time that he cherished so much.
I didn't exactly know what an orphanage was. But until then, no matter how tough school was, I could always return to my room and relax in the warmth of my solitude. But if I had to live in an orphanage, all of that would change. I would lose the privacy I longed to escape to. Soon, I realized the truth. Out of every single day and night of the year, I'd never have a moment of relief.
Rei's fate changes when Masashika Koda, a friend of Rei's father and pro shogi player, decides to adopt Rei under the one condition that Rei, too, took up professional shogi. Rei accepts the offer as that was the only way to even remotely continue his previous way of life. Rei is then introduced to Mr. Koda's family, and he meets his new siblings, Ayamu and Kyoko, both of whom are pushed by their father to become pro shogi players as well. Ayamu and Kyoko's shogi aspirations quickly dissipate as they see just how skilled Rei is. Mr. Koda tries to encourage them to continue their studies, but seeing Rei's skill discourages them to the point of quitting. Mr. Koda then focuses solely on teaching Rei. Ayamu and Kyoko start to develop feelings of animosity for their father and especially Rei. Ayamu begins to seclude himself, and Kyoko starts to verbally and physically abuse Rei. She tells him that he is responsible for tearing their family apart. Rei takes her words to heart and moves out after several years. At this point, he's 17. At this point, Rei has made a name for himself in the professional world of shogi and is one of a handful of young prodigies. He's been both looked up to and despised by many because of this. With his earnings from winning matches, Rei buys his own apartment in Marchtown. He feels alone and isolated there, but that was his intention. He doesn't want to interact with anybody outside of shogi. He doesn't want to hurt anyone after his experience at the Koda household. From what we see of his apartment, Rei barely takes care of himself, evident by the fact that he never has any food in his fridge, he sleeps on his apartment floor, and even uses cardboard to cover his window in place of blinds. The only thing Rei does at this point in his life is study shogi strategies, participate in shogi matches, sometimes attends high school, and sleeps copious amounts, which is a side effect of depression. Through his shogi matches, we notice Rei often feels guilt for beating his opponents, especially when his opponents' careers are on the line. During a match against his own adoptive father, who Rei hadn't seen since he moved out, remarks to himself that
every move I made felt like I was punching him with my bare hands.
In another match, Rei breaks down after beating an opponent who quit shogi immediately after his match with Rei.
my fault! Then tell me what I should have done! Go to hell!
One night, as Rei is returning home from one of his shogi matches, he passes out in front of a bar due to malnourishment. An employee there named Akari Kawamoto finds him and takes him to her home. Once there, she nurses Rei back to health, and he is introduced to the Kawamoto household. There, Akari, with the help of her grandpa, takes care of her two younger sisters, Hina, a middle school student, and Momo, the most adorable thing on planet Earth. Rei is thankful to the Kawamoto sisters and leaves. However, this one encounter changes Rei's life. Akari, knowing full well that Rei doesn't take care of himself, keeps contact with Rei and invites him over for dinner at their house quite often. Rei is often hesitant to accept her offers, as he still prefers to isolate himself, but more often than not, Akari's kind words convince Rei to visit. Rei slowly warms up to the Kawamoto household, and all three sisters are more than happy to have Rei over. In fact, Rei's presence helps ease the pain of loss and the sisters feel after the death of their mother. Rei begins to feel at home there and sees the sisters as somewhat of a beacon of light in his once dark mindset. Through his many interactions with them, Rei slowly learns the importance of connection with others. This is evident when, after a particularly devastating shogi defeat, Rei, instead of letting himself fall into another deep depression, decides to go to a shogi workshop and learn shogi strategies directly from others. Another instance of Rei's development can be seen when he decides to face another problem of his high school attendance. Rei often skips his classes to stay at home under the guise of studying shogi. His headmaster sees right through him, though, and insists Rei join a club to make up for some missing credits, as well as interact with his fellow students for once. Surprisingly, Rei takes the advice and joins the club. He quickly realizes how incredible it feels to interact with others outside of shogi and the Kawamoto household. By the end of Season 1, we see Rei go from somebody who secludes himself from others and lives in a constant state of depression to somebody that cherishes his interaction with others and feels indebted to those that taught him the value of those interactions. March Comes In Like a Lion flawlessly captures the struggles of depression and self-isolation through the lens of Rei Kiriyama. No other piece of media I've seen comes anywhere close to capturing the sense of humanity March Comes In Like a Lion presents. It's not a series I'd recommend to everybody, but to those with the patience for slower, down-to-earth stories, this is a must-watch. It's one of my favorite pieces of media I've ever had the pleasure of viewing.